Next, from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz goes one-on-one with State Senator Bill Brady as they discuss the ongoing efforts to reform the state's public pension systems. Senator Brady talks about the need to cut the rising cost of pensions and the areas where there may be agreement on how to do so in a way that is constitutional. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest State Senator Bill Brady. Everybody would know Bill Brady. He ran for governor on the Republican ticket in 2010. You remember the Republicans? They're the guys who always lose, except in the central portion of the state, downstate, and in other portions. And you only lost by 80,000 votes, right, Bill?
Well, 15,000 votes differently, we would have won.
That's all, 15,000
yes.
votes? I thought it was 80,000.
No.
So it's 30,000 total? You mean 50?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, but seriously, they don't always lose. I don't want to get a bad rep with Republicans here. I got enough trouble, okay? But you should have won that race. I don't mean it was your fault.
We won all but 3 counties.
But
You're
Republicans, but that doesn't matter. Cook County, you have to not win, but you know you've got to lose by not so much, and then the other counties can offset it, right?
There's no question. We need to do better in Cook County, and we did very well, as I said, in all but 3 counties.
But we're not here to talk.
But we didn't have the turnout we really wanted.
Here's what we're here to do, Bill, okay?
Yeah.
We're taping this show on June 10th. John Cass wrote a column, and he kind of rules up here in Cook County. Or as Tony Pryka would say, Crook County. You know that, right? All right, so you know John Cass.
Very well.
And he said, look, where's the Scott Walker? Where's the guy who will get out in front of the parade, not join the parade? Yeah. Are you that guy, Bill Brady?
Well, he's right. And I think we ran a campaign that was very out front on the issues. We talked about Medicaid reform. We talked about pension reform. We talked about reducing the tax burden on average Illinois citizens, all the things that need to be done. We're going to continue to lead on those issues, and those are what are important in order to bring a vibrant economy.
Hammer that at me one more time. Pension reform. What were the other 2 issues?
Medicaid reform, pension reform, balancing our budget, reducing tax burdens on average Illinois families, creating jobs.
What about education reform? Was that in there too?
Well, certainly there's a lot of things we need to do in education. Right now, the biggest priorities probably are in terms of solving the financial crisis facing this state. Our bond rating's at risk. Jobs are at risk if we don't do so. But there's no question we have to continue to provide and strive for the best educational opportunities.
But you're saying Medicaid reform and pension reform are the 2 big drivers to get the budget under control, to get the bond rating back up, and to move the economy forward in the state of Illinois.
Probably
Did I get that right?
You're right. Nothing more important right now.
So let's go right to pension reform. We're not going to screw around, as sometimes people say we do here. Now, what did you tell people when you ran for governor in 2010? Yeah. What were the 2 or 3 things you say have to be done to have pension reform? And we're talking about state employees and others who are somehow under the state pension system, even though they may not technically be state employees.
Well, it wasn't just 2010. I've been saying it for 10 years.
Since 10 years, since you became a state senator in 2002, and
correct.
Before that you were a state rep for what, 8 years, right?
I said, this is nothing but a Ponzi scheme. I mean, Bernie Madoff and John...
Ponzi? We most would say Ponzi, right?
Ponzi.
All right.
John Law and Bernie Madoff don't hold a candle to Illinois as politicians. For the last 10 years, the Democratic-controlled budgets, the governor's signature, the Democratic governor's signature on these budgets have led to this financial catastrophe. And it's unfortunate that now we're in a position where a promise that was made to people in the pension system, people who paid, we're having to ask them to help us alter this so that we can live up to the liabilities we have.
Because they're underfunded. That's the word.
Oh, $80+ billion.
That the state was supposed to put in, individual employees put their money in, but the state didn't put it in, right?
That's absolutely right.
So as you say, a Ponzi scheme. People would be sent to jail if it was done in a private sector. Yeah. Who's to blame? Speaker Mike Madigan, he's been there almost 3 or 4 decades. Is he to blame?
I think the people who voted for the budgets and supported the budgets, the union leaders, the Speaker of the House, the General Assembly, the Democrats in the General Assembly, Governor Quinn, Governor Berkowitz, people who supported
Wait a second,
budgets.
what about Governor George Ryan? Now, let's be fair.
Well,
Governor Jim Thompson.
I will tell you.
I mean, Republicans as well as Democrats didn't fund that system, right?
Well,
I mean,
no,
fair is fair, Bill.
Let me be accurate. George Ryan funded it according to the law. In 1995, we passed a law that would have put us on the right path of funding. George Ryan lived up to that law. Enter Rod Berkowitz and the Democratic control of the
Jim
General
Edgar,
Center.
but you know, when they constructed that, the Republicans sort of did that in '95 when you folks had control for 2 years in the State House, right?
We tackled the issue.
And you had the State Senate, so you had control.
Right.
But you know what people say you did is you back-ended that. You had small payments while you guys were there. I don't mean you, but Jim Edgar was governor. Well, and then when Jim Edgar was to leave, then now the scheduled payment is $5 billion.
Yeah, but
not quite fair,
but
Bill.
we could have, no, I don't think you're looking at it accurately. There was no question. We ramped up the payment and then
back-ended is the phrase.
Level percentage. Right. But the Democratic-controlled General Assembly, Governor Berkowitz and Governor Quinn failed to meet those obligations. Governor Ryan did, in spite of all the things he's been attacked for.
Or despite other things they did, that Secretary of State's office that sent him to jail.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're not defending those, but you're saying, but on the pension system, Georgia did what he was supposed to do.
He lived up to the law.
Jim Edgar, you're saying, did what he was supposed to do?
For 2 years.
Rod Berkowitz did not do what he was supposed to do.
Nor Pat Quinn.
Nor Pat Quinn. And, you know, we'd like Pat Quinn to come on the show. We've invited him, and we're fair and balanced. So, Pat, if you want to dispute that, you know, I'm going to do the best job to challenge Bill Brady I can, but Pat, you're the guy to challenge. I mean, you ran against him. And when you were running against Pat Quinn, because sometimes people are now calling this the Brady-Quinn pension proposal. Well, is that right? Is the proposal of Pat Quinn in 2012, is this the Brady-Quinn pension proposal?
Well, let me just say this. In that election, Governor Quinn told the unions that he would not do anything to alter their pensions. I was honest with people. I said, if we're going to restore Illinois, we've got to deal with this head on. And it's unfortunate. Which means? That we've got to come up with the reforms.
Okay, but give me the 2 or 3 things. Did you tell people that they were going to have to raise the retirement age from 55 and 62 to 67? Did you tell them that in 2010?
No. What I said is we're going to have to look at retirement age. We're going to have to look at COLA. The most costly portions of the Illinois pension system is something that was passed in, I believe, 1990, which offered 3% compounded cost of living increases.
Irrespective of what happened to the cost of living. So it was kind of a misnomer, right? It was an automatic 3%, right?
And compounded interest works great when you're on the receiving end.
Not on the paying end.
Not on the paying end. And so what I've said is we have to, fair and balanced, work with the people who need a solid pension program, well-funded, to protect average Illinois citizens, but yet do the best we can for a win-win. So the reforms that we've come up with over the last several months are in compliance with the governor and the Senate President's requirement that there be a contractual offer to the people.
So you're buying into that?
I didn't buy into it, but I agreed to it.
Okay, but before we get to that, so back in 2010, you're saying you were telling the voters and the state employees and the people who didn't want to hear it, who would be affected by raising their employee contributions, by raising their retirement age, by lowering the cost of living adjustment. You were telling them you'd take a look. We had to take a look at those things.
We're going to have to have a discussion.
You didn't say you're going to have to do those things. You said take a look at it.
I said we have to do something.
Okay, and you're saying Pat Quinn was telling them don't have to do anything. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I recall.
And that's what who is it? Who's the executive director of the American Federation? Asked me, American Federation for State Council.
Henry Bear? Is that who you're thinking of?
Henry Bear. He was on this show, and basically he said that, you know, Quinn told him one thing, they gave him money, the unions, and then he did another. He basically says he's adopted your program. Henry Bear says Governor Quinn has adopted the Pat Brady program.
Bill Brady.
Excuse me, Pat Brady's the Republican chairman. Hi, Pat, we'll have you on there too. Okay. So he's adopted the Bill Brady program, right?
Well, I've been honest with the people and the governor. These are
so you didn't get the union contributions because you're honest, right?
No.
But it went to Quinn, he got the contributions, he became governor, and now he's adopted, in large part, at least as a proposal. And to be fair, Quinn has done that as a leader. He's come out and said, we raise the retirement age, we need to increase employee contributions. You agree with that, right?
I applaud the governor for
You agree with increasing employee contributions, right?
In the confines of the mix, what I've supported is that in exchange for continuation of health care and pensionable salaries, we need you to take an alternative COLA that's not 3% compounded, but it's more fair and balanced.
And you're going to leave them alone on the retirement age, you're going to leave them alone on the employee contributions.
You have to understand there's a finite amount of savings in this concept of a contractual offer and acceptance. And the best way we save money is to speed up the funding and to alter the COLA, cost of living increase.
Speed up the funding, you mean put more money into it.
If we can get more people to accept the alternative COLA, that gives us more resources to pay down the debt faster,
but it doesn't,
which saves us money.
What's the estimated savings from you in the Senate passed legislation that would, at least for 2 of the 5 funds, but only 2.
Here's the catch. The catch is we don't know how many people are going to accept the reform because they're going to be given an offer. If everyone accepted the reform, we would over $100 billion over 30 years.
Because of the reduced COLA?
Because of the reduced COLA
Really?
and the expedited funding mechanism, which saves us money.
What's the expedited funding mechanism?
Well,
I hadn't heard so much about that.
We would put funding on a 30-year GASB funding plan so that 100% of the liabilities would be funded over 30 years.
Does that mean that the state over the next 30 years is going to be paying in $80 billion or more?
No, we'll actually reduce. We'll pay more than that because, but we'll
how much are you going to pay in over the next 30 years?
Oh, boy, I think I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. $200
billion you're going to put in?
But that's all costs.
Well, wait a second. But that's an average of $6 billion a year. You don't got 200. You don't have $6 billion a year to put in, do you?
Well, we have to.
You don't got. That's not great language, but you know.
And that's what we're making.
As Barack Obama said, you know, I speak, Jeff, the common man's touch.
Yeah, well, you
don't got $200 billion.
We do, and we have to live up to this, and that's why we need to create a win-win environment, protecting the people who've paid into the pensions, protecting the average citizens in Illinois.
But Bill, excuse me, but are you really saying you're going to put in an average of $6 billion a year that the state of Illinois is going to be able to make that kind of a pension payment each year?
I do believe so. Now, again, you have to understand, if all the people accept the deal.
I haven't heard that one. We're making news here today.
Under the demands of the Democrats, the governor and the Senate, we have to enter into a contractual framework. So again, that's presuming everyone takes the deal. I don't believe everyone will take it.
And if they don't, then you're saying, do you put in less or more?
Well, we'd have to put in more. But again...
And the savings will be less because they're not taking the deal. But if they don't take the deal, that means they're giving up retirement health care, and you're saving there, right?
We are saving.
In fact, there's some people who say, screw pension reform. If you could just get everybody off, get everybody to agree that they're not going to get any retirement health care for the state employees, then you could deliver on your pension payments.
You couldn't probably.
I mean, that's a pretty big liability too, right?
We need to unfortunately ask for more than that, but we really do want to be able to maintain their health care in their retirement years. We don't want them to lose that. It's just.
But you want them to pay. You want them to pay a little bit more. These people who are taking the deal are going to end up paying more for health care, aren't they?
Presumably, under this.
Right now, up until a year ago, they weren't paying anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was an amazing deal.
Well,
Anybody else got a deal where you're retired and you're paying zero for your health care?
But that was not all employees. Teachers paid for their health insurance anyway.
But many state employees were not.
You're right, and you won't find many states, if any, that do that.
No, it's a ridiculous plan. It's a great giveaway. I mean, if you happen to be a recipient, it's nice. But you'd have to be a moron to vote for that kind of thing. Bill, you didn't vote for that, do you?
Vote for what?
Vote for any plan that gave retirees health care with zero contribution on their part.
No. In fact,
you wouldn't have supported that. You agree with me? You'd have to be a moron to vote for that, right?
In the confines of, I'm not going to label anyone that, but in the confines of what we're dealing with.
All right, Fred, you have to run for governor. I can do that because I'm on TV.
We have precious few resources. What we're trying to do is, to use your term, come up with a fair and balanced approach that protects all the people of Illinois, not just specific sectors.
All right, so let's go to the current. You know, we're taping this on the 10th.
Yes.
And now I say again, John Cass said Illinois needs a Scott Walker. And you know, I had David Harris here. You know David.
Yes.
2-star general, state rep. And he said, you know, the Republicans can't exercise the leadership here because you need somebody statewide. And he said, Pat Quinn's the governor. He made the proposal, but he's not leading. And I said, well, Cross could do it. He said, no, he's not statewide. He's the House Republican leader, minority leader, but he's not statewide. I said, Radonio could do it. He says, no, she's not statewide. And you know, I didn't think, because sometimes I don't think, because I thought, who do the Republicans have after the show who's statewide? And you know the name that came up? Who would come up? Come on, give me a name of some Republican who's elected statewide who could be exercising leadership. Be fair.
Well, there's several statewide. We have three. Mark Kirk, Dan Rutherford, and Judy Bart-Topinka.
Okay, Mark Kirk's recovering from a stroke, and he's on the federal side, so we'll give him a pass on this. Judy Bart-Topinka is a comptroller. She could do it. She's statewide. Dan Rutherford, he's now the treasurer. And you know, David Harris was talking about how the treasurer of the state of Rhode Island, who's a Democrat, exercised leadership. And I'm thinking, Harris never mentioned Rutherford, and I, being the cluck that I am, didn't. So now I'm recovering and say to you, Bill Brady, Should he be out there, or should it be you, Bill, because you ran statewide? So you're Rutherford, Brady, and Topinka are the three people who, and Kirk Dillard, because he ran in the primary statewide. You folks should be doing what Harris said should be done, going hamlet to hamlet, village to village. Are you doing that, Bill?
Yes. I've been talking in shows like yours, meeting with people individually across the state. This is going to take leadership. I do think that the situation...
Wait a second, is Dan Rutherford doing that?
You'll have to ask Dan that. But I will.
And let me say, we've asked Dan to come out here. We hope he'll come out here because we're fair and balanced. We're not just going to go after Democrats. We're going to go after anybody who people say, not us, should be doing something and ask them, are they doing it?
Well,
and you're doing it. You're saying,
this is important.
You're not going to comment on Rutherford. What about Dillard? Is Dillard doing it?
You'll have to ask him.
Well, let me just say this.
Let me say this.
Well, I invited Topinka out. Is Topinka doing it?
As much as I appreciate the governor stepping up and realizing we have a problem, I would hope that he could be out a little bit more because he is the governor. I'm more than willing to talk to people.
He's not out there doing it at all. Was he even in Springfield? I was down there. Was he there?
I agree with you.
What was he doing? Was he in hiding or something?
Because what they did in Rhode Island is they explained the situation. Once people understand the catastrophe we're in and the fact that this Ponzi scheme is up, they are looking for reforms that will solidify the system. When I explain that to people, they are much more comfortable with the why. They don't agree with it, and they shouldn't, but they understand it, and we need fewer scare tactics and more educational experiences so people understand the deal we're dealing with.
And folks, if you watch the David Harris show and you saw I missed a few things, we're doing catch up here. We're filling in the holes. And you can, if you missed the David Harris show, you can watch that on youtube.com/publicaffairs.tv. Our shows go up before you. I know people are just dying to see this stuff. We keep telling people they can make money to get Berkowitz on, 257 or. They don't want to do it. Bill, those stations don't want to make money. They really don't, right?
You've got your following here.
I do have my following. Okay, so another thing we forgot, Berkowitz screws up quite a bit, okay? Because the major holdup to passing this stuff on May 31st was this idea of the cost shift. Yeah. The school districts vote for, they set to some extent the pensions for their employees. Not completely. Doesn't the state mandate how pensions will work for teachers? Now, they set the salaries by contract, but let me just ask you, does the state of Illinois set the requirements for pensions for the teachers?
Yes.
So, in what sense when people say, well, the school district said it? No, the state sets it. Now, the state, so Mike Madigan turns around, and Senate President Colton, I think, and maybe you, Bill, you all say, okay, it's unfair. The school districts are deciding pensions, but they're not paying it. They're spreading those costs among the general taxpayer, the property taxpayers in their district. But is that right? Because the state is setting the pension costs, aren't they?
Well, there's a huge educational gap in terms of how this works. You're absolutely right. The state dictates pension benefits for teachers and others. There is this term cost shift, which I think is a complete misnomer. There's no question that I believe there ought to be accountability prospectively on the part of school boards as they relate to pay raises and the cost associated. But what the Democrats are really talking about is shifting the liability of the pension systems to property taxpayers.
In those school districts, and to some extent it's warranted because, as you say, a portion of the state pension methodology is set by the state, but to some extent the actual pension levels are set by the school districts because they determine the levels of compensation.
Because salary has something. Now we can change
so it's
that
a shared setting, but yet it's all paid for by the general taxpayers.
And there's no question that was gamed for many years, which is why we supported legislation that capped those pay raises. So we have a problem with this. But to say that they want to shift the liabilities to property taxpayers, that's not pension reform. That's putting off the burden of the state's weaknesses and sins of the last decade onto the property taxpayers, and that's not right.
Well, but eventually you want to get there because the school districts do have something to say about the level of pensions that are going to be paid out, and you don't want to have people setting that without incurring any costs. You agree with me on that, right? You are a supply sider, right?
You're right. Yes.
And if you're a supply sider, you want incentives to be aligned properly. They're not currently aligned properly.
That's why we talk about accountability. Okay. But we don't talk about and we don't agree with shifting the liability that the state created to property taxpayers.
But your point is that should be set aside because that doesn't involve cost savings. That says who pays.
That's not reform.
That says who pays. You may have to deal with that separately, but your point, I think, would be deal with the reform you want, and they deal with it separately. But Mike Madigan says he thinks that has to be in there, and he said the last day of the session, okay, Tom Cross, you want this? You can be the sponsor, and that bill, and then you can take out the cost shifting that he wanted in there, and you can be the sponsor, and then Tom Cross pulled the plug because he couldn't get the votes to pass it without the cost shifting, right?
Well, the Democrats walked. And
so but you also didn't have enough Republicans. Even if you had all the Republicans voting for it, you wouldn't have a majority, but you were far short. You might have had some Democrats, right?
The agreement has always been that the Republicans would attempt to put half the votes on the bill and the Democrats put that. We're in a position to do that, we believe. We did on the bill that passed the Senate.
So Madigan walks, Cross can't get it through, that's where that sits. The Four Tops are meeting with the governor. They met earlier this week. We're taping this on the 10th. They're going to meet again probably on the 21st, the Four Tops with the governor.
Well,
and something may come of it, right?
Our pension working group, Elaine Neckritz, myself, and Darlene Singer, met with the four leaders and the governor
you were there
this last week. We brought everyone up to date. Some more questions were raised. We agreed we'd take 2 weeks to do some fact-finding to answer those questions with the presumption that on the 21st we'll meet again and hopefully
Four Tops and the governor and you and Elaine Neckritz and Darlene Singer? Okay. And then something will happen at that meeting?
Well, do
you think you can get an agreement that could be shaped into legislation and soon would be sufficiently delineated so the General Assembly could be called back into session and something passed?
I think we've agreed on the reforms.
When you say we, who's we?
I think collectively,
the Four Tops,
way, we've
you,
agreed on the
Neckritz,
reforms.
and Sanger, and Quinn.
The
eight of you have agreed. Now,
yes.
Let me just get this right. The Four Tops, Madigan, Cullerton, Radonio, and Cross, the three people in the committee, Neckritz, Brady, and Sanger, and the governor, Quinn. Those 8 people have agreed now. Is that what you're saying?
I believe that we have conceptually agreed, and in fact could agree on the reforms. The whole idea and concept, though, of throwing the liabilities off onto the property taxpayer.
Is there any agreement on that?
No, there's clearly not.
You don't want to do that, right? Okay, and Cross doesn't want to do that, and Radonio doesn't want to do that. What about Neckritz and Sanger?
I believe Singer does not want to do it.
That's 4.
And Neckritz would probably support it, but I'll let her speak for herself.
What about Quinn? Quinn said he didn't want to do it, right?
No, clearly.
So the majority of you don't want to do it. I'm counting noses here, right?
Clearly the Democrats.
Madigan wants to do it.
Clearly the Democrats want to do it.
Politically, it's a good idea for them because their downstate suburban is more Republican than Democratic. They want to push costs onto Republicans. That will be beneficial to them. Am I right? Is that just pure politics?
And by the way, no push of liabilities onto City of Chicago School District property tax payers.
So you're saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you saying they're playing pure politics? Politically, this is a wise idea.
Well,
policy-wise, you're saying not.
No, policy-wise, we agree on prospective accountability. Policy-wise, we disagree on shifting the burden of the state's sins, the liability, onto property taxpayers.
All right. But you would be, part of the proposal is to transition this in. A very small percent, 1% of the payroll would be borne by the real estate, by the property tax owners in those districts. Small percentage spread out, transitioned in over, what, 20 or 30 years. Could you buy into that as a compromise?
These are the state's weaknesses. Let me go back to this.
We can't spend the rest of the show. We only have a few minutes left.
Earlier I told you that if 100% of the people adopted the reforms, we'd be in a good position. Okay. We don't know how many people are going to do it or what the true costs are. Until the election period's over, we won't be able to tell people the truth about it. You think the constitutional issue is handled by this trade, this discussion, this compromise, and if you can get the reforms passed you want, you think the state Supreme Court's going to say this is constitutional, right? We hope so.
The only hang-up, you're saying, is this cost shift issue. Madigan and Cullerton want it, and perhaps 1 or 2 others, Democrats involved in and now what we'll call the G8. The G8, see, we've given you a name to this group, the G8 in the state of Illinois, okay? But Madigan and Cullerton are clearly the folks. Madigan's vote counts for like 10, right? Your vote counts for 1. You know, the Tribune wrote this series of articles about Mike Madigan. They said he's got too much power. They say he has all these conflicts of interest. Did you read him? And do you agree with the Tribune?
You know, there's no question that Mike Madigan has had power for
what about the conflicts of interest? I mean, Madigan says, you know, the Tribune writers are garbage haulers for a bankrupt company.
Well,
What do you say to Mike Madigan?
I'm going to leave that debate between Mike Madigan and the Tribune. I will tell you, one of the reasons I support term limits is because too much power can be concentrated in too few individuals by not having term limits. So I've suggested a 10-year term limit in each chamber, which would have limited...
For state reps?
State reps,
state senators?
state senators.
What about the speaker? What's the term limit?
Well, that would be 10 years.
Starting when? Starting 30 years ago or starting now?
Well, whatever we
Does
can,
Mike have 10 more years? Because
whatever,
I asked him, I interviewed Mike. Folks, you can find this. Go to the Illinois Channel, working with my colleague Terry Martin. We caught Mike Madigan. Nicely, he gave us a 7-minute made news. But I asked him, the last question was, 30 years, do you got another 10? You know what Speaker Mike said? He said, just you watch. He said, this is just the beginning. You may be there for another 30 or 40.
But that's too much concentration in too few people of power is why we need
Bill, are you going to run for governor?
You know what, I'll make that decision after this. I'm focused on electing senators between now and November.
Just between us, girls.
Just between us?
Yeah.
I'll talk to my wife about it after November.
But it sounds like you're going to do it, right?
Well, I'm committed to...
I mean, 30,000 votes, that's pretty close, right?
Yes. I'm committed to making Illinois the best state in the nation for average Illinois citizens. And I think I could do a lot by being governor of the state.
Did you lose because of the social issues? Rich Miller said it was personal PAC and Terry Cosgrove, and you just... there are too many upstate suburban folks who can't buy into your no exceptions policy on abortions. Is that right? You don't think abortion should be legal except, unless it's the life of the mother, no abortion, no exceptions for rape or incest, right?
Well, we've made my position clear. Let me go back.
But did you lose because of that? Did you lose because of that?
No, I don't believe I lost. The reason I think, well, let me go back to a conversation I had with Jeb Bush after the election. He said, Bill, just so you know, I don't think I would have won the second time if I didn't lose the first time. This is the first time I'd been on the statewide scene in a general election. People got to know me. I think the more they got to know me, the better off I was.
You're a likable guy. But seriously, I'm not buttering you up. You're a likable guy.
You're kind to say.
If you came on the show maybe once a week, I think we could get you elected.
Be happy to come on as much as you'd like, because we always have a good discussion.
No, but seriously, was it just that you weren't known enough? Some people said you didn't spend enough time. I know you had an apartment up here. I know you were working the upstate area, north of I-40. Is it north of I-80? Okay. But some people said you just wouldn't get out there and spend enough time upstate. What do you say to those folks?
They're wrong. Our campaign was strategic in the point that I needed to get everywhere I did the least well in the primary. We knew that. So that's where we spent most of our time.
Can you beat Dan Rutherford? I mean, you guys are drawing somewhat from the same pool. He's from Central Illinois. Isn't he from Central Illinois?
Dan Rutherford's running.
Is he from Central Illinois?
He's from Chinoa.
Okay, so you guys are drawing somewhat from the same pool, and maybe that allows the opportunity for Kirk Dillard, who was last time competing with a few DuPagers. He keeps them out. It's Dillard against a few central state guys, central portion of the state, Brady and Rutherford. It goes to Dillard, right?
We don't know who's running. We'll weigh that decision.
Anybody else that I'm not mentioning? Dillard, Rutherford, Brady?
I'm sure there's more people out there thinking about it, but I don't know
Dan
who
Proft,
they are.
maybe?
Dan.
You're watching the Illinois Channel.